The symbols appeared on her skin when she was 13 years old. Not tattoos, not scars, just there one morning when she woke up, faint golden marks running down her inner forearms like hieroglyphs written in light that only she could see. Doctors found nothing. Dermatologists saw normal skin, but Rebecca could see them clearly, could trace the shapes with her fingers, could feel them warm under her touch like they were alive, like they remembered something her conscious mind had forgotten. Her parents thought she was making it up for attention. The school counselor suggested she was stressed, but Rebecca knew what she was seeing was real, even if no one else could perceive it. And when Dr. Michael finally put her under hypnosis 32 years later and asked her to go back to when the symbols first appeared, she didn't go back to age 13. She went back 4,000 years. And what she said next made Dr. Michael reach for his reference books on ancient Egypt, because the words coming out of her mouth weren't English anymore. The therapy room was cooler than usual, the air conditioning set low because Dr. Michael found that people went deeper into trance states when they were slightly cold, when their bodies had to work a little harder to maintain temperature, when comfort was automatic and the conscious mind had something physical to manage. That kept it occupied while the subconscious opened up. Rebecca sat in the reclining chair with her eyes closed, her breathing already slowing into the rhythm that indicated she was dropping into hypnotic state faster than most people did, like some part of her had been waiting for this opportunity, had been ready to speak for decades, and just needed permission to finally let it out. Dr. Michael had worked with past life regression for 20 years, had heard hundreds of people describe lives in different time periods, different cultures, different bodies, but something about Rebecca's energy made him more alert than usual. Made him check the recorder twice to make sure it was working, made him feel like he was about to witness something significant. When he asked Rebecca to describe where she was, her voice came out different, accented in a way he couldn't place, speaking English, but with a cadence and rhythm that felt ancient, that felt like she was translating from another language in real time, finding English words for concepts that existed in a tongue that had been dead for millennia. I am in a temple. The stone is warm under my feet. I can feel the heat rising from it even though the sun is setting and the air is cooling. There are columns everywhere, massive, painted in colors so bright they hurt to look at. Reds and blues and golds that shimmer in the torchlight. The smell of incense is thick, makes it hard to breathe. Myrrh and frankincense and something else I don't have a name for. Something sacred, something that's only burned in the presence of the gods. I can hear chanting, low voices, men's voices. They're in another chamber, but the sound carries through the stone, vibrates through the floor into my bare feet. Dr. Michael asked her to look at herself to describe what she was wearing, and Rebecca's hands moved to her forearms, traced invisible patterns there exactly the way she'd been doing since age 13, and when she spoke again her voice carried a weight of authority that hadn't been there before. I'm wearing white linen, very fine, almost transparent. It's wrapped around my body in a way that leaves my arms bare. And on my arms are the symbols, gold, real gold somehow embedded into my skin so it doesn't wash away, doesn't fade, marks me as what I am. I can read them, I know what they say. They say I am a keeper of knowledge, a recorder of wisdom, a bridge between the earthly realm and the realm of the gods. They say I have permission to enter the sacred spaces, to read the forbidden texts, to speak the words of power that most people will never hear in their entire lives. The mystery was opening now like a door into darkness, revealing just enough to make you want to see more but holding back the full picture. Dr. Michael asked, who gave her those marks, who had the authority to embed gold into skin as a sign of sacred office, and Rebecca's answer came with a certainty that felt absolute, the high priest. During the ceremony of initiation, I was 14 years old. They chose me because I could see things, could see the energy that moves through all living things, could see the light that surrounds the temples, could see the beings that exist between the physical world and the spirit world. Most people can't see them, but I could, always could, from the time I was very small, and the priests noticed. They tested me, gave me tasks, asked me to describe things I shouldn't have been able to perceive, and when I passed every test, when they were certain I wasn't pretending or guessing or repeating things I'd overheard, they brought me to the temple, and they marked me, made me one of them, made me a keeper. Dr. Michael felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He asked what knowledge she was keeping, what wisdom she was meant to record and preserve, and Rebecca's face in the present moment, lying in the hypnotic trance with her eyes closed, shifted into an expression of profound sadness mixed with a responsibility so heavy it seemed to age her. Everything, the healing practices, the astronomical observations, the mathematical calculations, the spiritual teachings, the methods for entering altered states of consciousness, the techniques for leaving the body and traveling to other realms, the names of the gods and the proper way to invoke them, the architecture of reality itself, the structure that holds the physical world in place, the invisible scaffolding that most humans move through without ever knowing it's there, all of it written down, all of it preserved, all of it protected. Because we knew that civilizations rise and fall. We knew that knowledge gets lost. We knew that future generations would forget, and it was our job to make sure that when they were ready to remember, the information would still be there waiting for them. The revelation was starting to take shape, starting to show its edges. Rebecca wasn't just describing a past life in ancient Egypt. She was describing a role, a function, a sacred duty that had shaped not just that one lifetime but potentially many lifetimes, including this one where symbols appeared on her skin that no one else could see. Dr. Michael asked her to move forward in that lifetime, to show him what happened next, what became of her role as a keeper of knowledge. Rebecca's breathing quickened. Her hands gripped the armrests of the chair, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an urgency that made the room feel smaller, the air heavier. There was a change coming. We could feel it. The priests who were older than me, who had been keepers for 50 years or more, they started talking in whispers about how the old ways were being forgotten, how the Pharaoh's court was more interested in power and wealth than in spiritual development, how the temples were being seen as political institutions rather than sacred spaces, how knowledge that had been carefully preserved for thousands of years was suddenly being questioned, challenged, dismissed as superstition by people who had never bothered to understand it. And we knew that our time was ending, that the age of the keepers was coming to a close, that we needed to hide what we knew before it was destroyed or corrupted or used for purposes it was never meant to serve. She described the work that followed, the careful process of taking scrolls and tablets and documents that contained the most sacred and powerful knowledge and hiding them in places where they might survive the coming darkness, the coming forgetting. Some were sealed in chambers beneath the temples. Some were buried in the desert in locations marked only by astronomical alignments that would mean nothing to polluters, but would be readable to anyone who understood the language of the stars. Some were encoded in symbols, carved into stone monuments, hidden in plain sight, protected by the assumption that they were merely decorative rather than functional. And Rebecca herself, young as she was given a specific task. She was told to memorize certain teachings. Not just memorize the words, but embody the understanding. Become a living repository of knowledge so that even if every physical text was destroyed, the wisdom would survive in consciousness, in soul memory, in the kind of knowing that transcends individual lifetimes. Dr. Michael asked what specific knowledge she was meant to remember, what teaching was so important that it needed to be preserved in her very being rather than just written down. Rebecca went very still. Her breathing almost stopped, and when she spoke, her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, like she was sharing something that even now, 4,000 years later, felt dangerous to speak aloud. The secret of consciousness. How to separate awareness from the body. How to travel in the soul form while the physical form sleeps. How to access information that exists outside of time. How to heal not just bodies, but the energetic patterns that create disease in the first place. How to see past lives, future possibilities, alternate time. How to recognize other souls you've traveled with across multiple incarnations. How to remember your purpose, your mission, the specific lessons you came to learn and teach. All of it. All the knowledge that makes humans more than just animals. All the understanding that elevates consciousness to its full potential. That's what I was meant to remember. That's what they put into me. And that's what I carried forward. The weight of that revelation settled into the room like a physical presence. Dr. Michael realized he was holding his breath, and forced himself to exhale to stay grounded, to keep asking questions even though part of him wanted to just sit in silence and let the magnitude of what was being shared wash over him. He asked Rebecca what happened to her in that lifetime, how it ended, whether she succeeded in preserving what she was meant to preserve. Her face contorted with pain, her hands moved to her chest, pressed against her sternum like she was trying to hold something in or push something out. I was 23 when they came. Soldiers, acting on orders from the Pharaoh's vizier, who wanted to consolidate power, who saw the temples as competition, who understood that priests who could see through lies and manipulation were dangerous to political authority. They came in the night, broke down the doors, dragged us out into the courtyard. demanded we tell them where the sacred texts were hidden, where the gold was stored, where the power was kept. And we refused, all of us, even the youngest initiates, even me. We knew that giving them access to knowledge they were unprepared to use wisely would be worse than dying, would be a betrayal of everything we'd sworn to protect. So we stayed silent, and they killed us for it. The death scene unfolded in brutal detail as Rebecca described it, her body in the present-day reclining chair starting to shake, starting to experience the trauma of that ancient death as if it was happening now. The soldiers had been methodical, killing the keepers one by one in front of each other to try to break their silence through fear. Rebecca had watched the high priest die, had watched the older keepers die, had known with absolute certainty that she would be next and that she would not break, would not speak, would carry the secrets to her death, because that's what a keeper does. When they finally came to her, when they demanded one last time that she reveal the location of the hidden texts, she had looked them in the eyes and spoken the words of power, the sacred phrase that was meant to seal knowledge away from those who would misuse it, and they had killed her for it. A blade to the heart. Quick, almost merciful compared to what they'd done to some of the others, but permanent, final, the end of that lifetime and that role. Except it wasn't the end, because what the soldiers didn't understand, what the vizier who sent them didn't understand, what no one outside the sacred mysteries understood, was that killing the body doesn't kill the knowledge, doesn't erase what has been learned and integrated, doesn't stop a soul from carrying forward what it has been entrusted to carry. Rebecca described the moment of her death in that lifetime, the moment when her awareness separated from her body and she saw clearly that the knowledge she'd been meant to preserve was in the scrolls they'd hidden, or the symbols they'd carved, or the temples they'd built. It was in her, in the consciousness that survived death, in the part of her that would incarnate again and again, bringing forward the same wisdom, the same understanding, the same ability to see beyond the physical and access information that most humans can't perceive. Dr. Michael asked if she'd incarnated in Egypt again, if she'd come back to finish the work or restore what was lost. Rebecca's answer surprised him. No, not Egypt. The work there was done. The knowledge was hidden well enough that it would be rediscovered when the time was right, when humanity was ready for it again. But I came back in other places, other times, always as someone who could see things, always as someone who carried knowledge that made other people uncomfortable. I was a monk in Tibet who could read the Akashic records. I was a healer in medieval Europe who got burned as a witch because I knew too much about herbs and energy and how to cure diseases that doctors could untouch. I was a shaman in South America who could leave my body and travel to other realms to bring back information for my tribe. Always the same role. Always a keeper. Always carrying forward what I learned in that temple in Egypt, even though I did unconsciously remember it in most of those lifetimes. And then she came to this lifetime. Born in suburban America in 1971, no temples, no formal training in sacred mysteries, no community of other keepers to recognize and nurture her gifts, just a normal childhood in a normal family with one very abnormal ability. She could see things, energy, auras, beings that existed in frequencies most people couldn't perceive. Her parents took her to doctors who found nothing wrong, took her to therapists who suggested she had an overactive imagination, took her to church where the pastor told her she was seeing demons and needed to pray more. But Rebecca knew what she was seeing was real, knew it the same way she'd known it at age 5 in that Egyptian temple when the priests first tested her, and when she was 13 and the symbols appeared on her skin, symbols she would later research and discover were actual hieroglyphs used by temple keepers in ancient Egypt. She knew she was remembering something. Knew she was being called back to a role she'd played before. The problem was that in this lifetime, in this culture, in this time period, there was no place for keepers, no temples that needed their knowledge preserved, no community that valued what she could see and understand. Just confusion, just isolation, just the crushing loneliness of carrying wisdom that no one around her wanted or recognized or knew how to receive. She spent her teenage years trying to hide what she could see, trying to be normal, trying to fit into a world that had no category for what she was. She went to college, got a degree in library science because at least that was about preserving and organizing information, even if it wasn't the kind of sacred knowledge she was meant to be keeping. Got married, had children, lived a life that looked normal from the outside while carrying this constant awareness that she was supposed to be doing something else, something more. Something that connected to who she'd been and what she'd learned across multiple lifetimes. The symbols on her arms stayed. invisible to everyone else but always there when she looked, reminding her, calling her, making it impossible to fully forget, even when forgetting would have been more comfortable. And the abilities stayed too. She could still see energy, could still perceive things that existed beyond the normal range of human perception, could still access information that seemed to come from nowhere. Knowledge about healing and consciousness and the structure of reality that she'd never studied in this lifetime but somehow knew anyway. And it made her feel crazy, made her question her own sanity, made her wonder if she was broken or damaged or just fundamentally different in a way that would never allow her to fully belong anywhere. Until this moment, until this regression session with Dr. Michael, where the pieces finally came together, where she understood that the symbols weren't hallucinations or stress reactions or psychological problems. They were memories, soul memories, marks that had been placed on her in another lifetime to designate her role, to remind her what she was meant to do, to call her back to the work of preserving and transmitting knowledge that humanity keeps forgetting and needs to keep rediscovering. And understanding that changed everything, changed how she saw herself, changed how she interpreted her entire life, changed the meaning of every moment she'd felt different or wrong or out of place. Dr. Michael asked her what she understood now about why she'd come back, why she'd incarnated in this time and place when there were no temples to serve in, no formal structures to support the role of keeper. Rebecca's answer came slowly, thoughtfully, like she was accessing understanding that was forming in real time as she spoke it. Because the knowledge needs to be available now. Because humanity is at a crossroads again, just like it was in Egypt when the old ways were being destroyed. Because people are ready to remember what they really are, what they're capable of. What exists beyond the physical world they've been taught is all there is. And the knowledge I've been carrying, the understanding that was sealed into my consciousness 4,000 years ago, it's not meant to stay hidden anymore. It's meant to be shared, not from a temple, not through formal institutions, but person to person, soul to soul, through the connections I make, through the work I do, through being a living example of someone who remembers. The emotional climax was building. That moment where intellectual understanding transforms into felt experience, where knowing something in your head drops into your body and changes you at a cellular level. Dr. Michael asked Rebecca to speak to that young keeper in Egypt, the one who died protecting sacred knowledge, the one who carried the responsibility so seriously she chose death over betrayal. Asked her what she needed to say. Rebecca's face crumpled, tears started flowing, even though her eyes remained closed. And when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion that had been held for 45 years in this lifetime, and for 1,000 years across multiple incarnations. Thank you. Thank you for being so brave. Thank you for protecting what needed protecting. Thank you for carrying the knowledge forward, even when it cost you everything. You didn't fail. The work you did mattered. The choice you made to die rather than speak was the right choice. And I'm sorry you had to make it. I'm sorry it was so hard. I'm sorry you had to leave that lifetime so young with so much work left undone. But you did what you needed to do. You preserved what needed preserving. And I'm here now. I'm still here, still carrying it, still a keeper, still protecting and sharing and holding space for knowledge that humanity needs. You can rest, you can let go. I've got it. I'll take it from here. The room went quiet except for Rebecca's breathing, which had shifted from shallow and tight to deep and full, like she was breathing for the first time in years, like some constriction in her chest had finally released. Dr. Michael waited, giving the moment space to complete itself, watching as Rebecca's face softened, as the tension left her body, as something fundamental shifted in her energy. And when she finally opened her eyes, the first thing she said was, "I understand now. All of it. Why I've always felt like I don't belong. Why I can see things others can't. Why information comes to me that I never studied. Why the symbols appeared when I was 13, right at the age when I was initiated in that other lifetime. It's all connected. It's all part of the same pattern. I'm not broken. I'm not crazy. I'm a keeper. I've always been a keeper. And that's not something to hide or fix or be ashamed of. It's what I came here to do." She left Dr. Michael's office that day and went home, and for the first time in her life, she didn't try to hide the symbols when she looked at them, didn't dismiss them as imagination or stress or delusion, saw them for what they were: reminders, call signs, marks of an office that transcends individual lifetimes. And something in her relaxed, something that had been tense and defensive and constantly vigilant, constantly trying to prove she wasn't crazy, constantly working to appear normal, finally let go. She started reading about ancient Egypt, started researching the role of temple keepers, started connecting with other people who had memories of serving in sacred capacities in past lives, and she found a community, not a physical temple, but a network of souls who recognized each other, who carried similar knowledge, who understood without explanation what it meant to be a keeper in a world that had forgotten it needed keeping. She started teaching, not formally, not in any official capacity, just sharing what she knew with people who were ready to hear it, teaching meditation techniques that helped people access their own soul memories, teaching energy healing methods that she'd learned in multiple lifetimes and had never studied in this one, teaching people how to see beyond the physical, how to perceive the energetic reality that underlies and creates the material world. And people responded, people who were ready, people who were seeking, people whose own souls recognized the knowledge she was sharing because they de-learned it themselves in other times and places and just needed someone to help them remember. The symbols on her arms changed after the regression. Not in appearance. They looked the same, but in how they felt. Before, they'd felt like a burden, a reminder of how different she was, how isolated, how misunderstood. After, they felt like a gift, a connection to her own history, a link to the work she'd done, and the role she'd played, and the knowledge she'd preserved across thousands of years and multiple lifetimes. She traced them sometimes when she was teaching, running her fingers over the invisible hieroglyphs, drawing strength from the knowing that she wasn't alone in this work, that she was part of a lineage of keepers that stretched back to the earliest days of human civilization, and forward into whatever future was unfolding. Dr. Michael kept her recording and listened to it many times, especially the parts where she spoke in that ancient cadence, where her voice carried authority that came from somewhere beyond this one lifetime. He'd worked with hundreds of regression clients, but something about Rebecca's session felt different, felt true, in a way that transcended the usual question of whether past life memories are real or imagined, because whether or not she'd actually been a temple keeper in ancient Egypt, whether or not those symbols had actually been embedded in her skin 4,000 years ago, what mattered was that understanding that history changed her present, gave her context for abilities that had felt like curses, gave her purpose for knowledge that had felt like burden, gave her permission to be what she'd always been, instead of trying to force herself into a shape that did unfit. Sometimes the things that make us feel most different are the things that connect us most deeply to our purpose. The abilities that seemed like problems in childhood become gifts in adulthood when we finally understand their source and their function. The knowledge that feels random or strange or impossible often points back to skills developed in other lifetimes. Wisdom carried forward, roles played across multiple incarnations. Rebecca's symbols weren't random. Her ability to see energy wasn't imagination. Her sense of responsibility for preserving and sharing knowledge wasn't ego or delusion. It was memory, soul memory. The kind that survives death and carries forward because some work is too important to abandon just because a body stops working. If you've always felt like you remember things you never learned, if you carry knowledge that seems to come from nowhere, if you have abilities that don't make sense given your background and training, maybe you're like Rebecca. Maybe you're a keeper who came back one more time to share what you've been preserving. Maybe the symbols you see, whether literal or metaphorical, whether visible to others or only to yourself, are reminders of who you've been and what you've carried and why you're here. You're not broken. You're not imagining it. You're remembering. And the world needs what you remember. Needs the knowledge you've been keeping. Needs you to stop hiding and start sharing. There are others, more keepers, more souls, who served in temples and monasteries and sacred spaces across history. More people waking up to who they've been. The next one starts now.